If you have a suspicion of an ongoing cyber attack to core business function, what makes the difference between a crisis that is managed effectively and when it's completely mismanaged? Murphy's Law kicks in at exactly the worst time. What makes the difference? Leadership. Panic spreads like virus. You're just trying to give instructions. You wouldn't be waiting until the last minute what you need to do next. Our customers got hacked. Here's what I've done. It's a Friday morning. I'm away for a long weekend with my then boyfriend, now husband. I wake up to a dozen missed calls, a team member's frantic message. I think we're under a cyber attack. My stomach sinks. And just like that, vacation's over. If you've ever led a crisis, you know Murphy's Law kicks in at exactly the worst time. I've been through my share of cyber incidents and cyber crises. Some handled well, others became cautionary tales. What makes the difference? Leadership. In today's episode, I'll share the 7 ways to lead during a cyber crisis like a pro, even under pressure. Let's dig in. Let's start with demystifying a myth. There is no one set or exact standard way to manage a crisis. In theory, as a known or unknown risk materializes or comes true, it becomes an incident. And when that incident reaches a threshold that usually has multiple predefined criteria, it becomes a crisis. Risk leads to incident, leads to crisis. Now, these risks can be both known and unknown to you. Just because you didn't know about it doesn't mean that the risk won't materialize. And when a risk materializes into an unintended event leading to some unintended consequences, it becomes an incident. When that incident goes beyond the threshold, it's categorized as a crisis. For example, some websites and business functions are down. That may be defined as an incident, but if some core functions are down for more than an hour, it's now deemed as a crisis depending on what your criteria is. Your definitions and criteria for what entails a crisis needs to already be in place. If you don't measure, you cannot respond to it appropriately. So you need to have those definitions and those thresholds very clearly defined. First and foremost, even before a crisis ever hits or the shit hits the fan, you need to get your bases covered. Like, what are the risks you and your business care about? How are you managing them and how effectively? How do you capture and respond to incidents, especially cyber incidents? What are the criteria that determines exactly when an incident will be escalated to a crisis? How do you mobilize your teams during a crisis to manage it effectively without creating more panic? So these are all the things you need to think about when you want to be ready for leading a crisis. And how do you manage a crisis like a pro despite chaos all around you? Number 1, understand theory versus reality. In theory, you have an incident first, and as you investigate it further, it's categorized as a security incident or a cyber incident. In reality, you can have an incident and immediately attribute it to a cyber attack based on the impact you observe. Critical systems shutting down, major configurations failing, etc. Even though it's not 100% confirmed that it's indeed a cyber attack, even if it's just a suspicion. In fact, a similar situation has happened to me in my CISO role, where we had enough information to know this was a major incident, but based on the impact we were seeing and critical services shutting down, we had a suspicion that we may be under a cyber attack. We did not set up a crisis team yet, but we did treat it as a major incident, and in some specific scenarios, even as a crisis. I verbally informed some of the key stakeholders who were a part of the crisis management teams to be ready in case we did have to declare it as a crisis, and we would then decategorize once we knew that it was not a crisis. If you have a suspicion of an ongoing cyber attack to core business function, you wouldn't be waiting until the last minute. You have all the evidence in the world before you bring in your crisis team and at least inform them and start understanding the repercussions and exactly what you need to do next. Sure, you shouldn't prematurely act on these information until you have something more tangible that's coming in. But having the ability to map out potential worst-case scenarios and be prepared for the exact steps you'll be needing to take, or be able to mobilize different crisis management teams as the evidence comes in and as the evidence confirms it, will make the difference of day and night in terms of how well you'll be able to contain the crisis and how effectively you'll be able to manage it. In reality, no crisis follows a documented playbook scenario, no matter how much anybody tells you that. Your ability to make fast decisions and your even stronger ability to pivot as completely contradictory or different information comes in is your number 1 trait as a leader who can manage a crisis well and who can manage a crisis effectively. Number two, understand the visible versus non-visible impact. There are things you see and notice immediately in a crisis. For example, that ransom note that's testing your ethics and patience, the website, the critical business services that are down, that's costing you millions of dollars by the hour, or the customer complaining about the service is not working, that's putting your customer service to true test. And then on the other hand, there are these non-visible impacts that takes weeks, sometimes even months to become apparent. And by the time they become visible, it's too late. For example, the data that you maybe knew got exfiltrated, but never knew until months later that it also got sold on the dark web to the highest bidder and then got used for fraud. Or that AI tool that you never even knew you had in your infrastructure that was sending all your intellectual property to the competitor, or the legal fines that you get slapped with because it wasn't obvious to you that not only were the hackers breaching your networks, but you were also breaching the regulatory requirements and the law. So having that understanding of the visible versus non-visible impact is really crucial to manage a crisis well and effectively. Number three, making effective and fast decisions versus acting with haste. An ongoing crisis requires making effective and fast decisions as the information is coming. You will never have 100% of the information. You will have to work with what you got, and you will have to make decisions as you go. That ability to be able to make effective decisions and then pivot as and when more information comes in, even when that new information may be contradictory, is what makes the difference between a crisis that is managed effectively and when it's completely mismanaged. On the flip side, the worst crisis leaders either freeze and are not able to make any decisions, or they make a decision in haste without understanding the repercussions of their decision, shooting themselves in the foot. Don't confuse speed with haste. Making fast decisions is about analyzing all the information you got at that point, having an understanding of what the worst case scenario might look like, and then making decisions based on what needs to be put in place or what would be the next immediate steps. Making a decision in haste usually happens when you don't even have any understanding, or you have not done a mapping, or what information is there. You're just trying to give instructions because you want to come across as a leader, but not really behave like a leader. I've seen a lot of crisis management teams either not act in the right time, or not take accountability, or make decisions so fast just to push that accountability somewhere else. And all that at the end comes back to bite you. Here are three scenarios that I've experienced. In one scenario, our customers got hacked because there was a breach in our systems and we were managing their systems, and we did not know fast enough about it until the customers told us that we had an ongoing cyber attack. I saw management mismanage the situation so much by not acting swiftly enough in the right time, by pushing accountability, and by not taking ownership of the mistakes that we had made. Never do that. In a second scenario, as the information came in for suspicion of a cyber attack, I saw the executive management and the business leaders brush it to the side by saying that it's not a cyber attack. That's not us. That can't be happening to us. It's probably just a performance issue, but it wasn't. And then I have experienced a third scenario at a client's where the information was coming in and the CISO and the client was so much in a rush that he decided to turn some systems off without realizing the dependencies that were actually put into place, or that actually were there between the systems and the critical systems, and actually putting critical systems down and offline because of that one decision that costed the business even more millions of dollars. Now, when it comes to a crisis, there is no one right answer. But the golden rule is you don't want to confuse speed with haste. And while you make one decision as the information comes in, you need to be able to make a different decision and more information comes in, because it may actually change the entire trajectory of what you thought you knew about what happened versus what really happened. And that's normal in a crisis. That's normal in cyber incidents, and especially normal in a cyber crisis situation. Number 4, panicking versus mobilizing your teams. While you don't want to freeze in a crisis situation, you definitely don't want to panic or show panic in your behavior, even if you may be panicking a little bit inside. Panic spreads like virus. The last thing that your team or your stakeholders need from you is you to be freaking out. In the crisis situations I've been in, here's what I've done. I bring in key people involved in the incident or an ongoing cyber attack, which may also be a crisis at the time, And here's the first things first. What do we know so far? What indicators of compromise have we seen? How did we find out about this? What are the specific triggers that that may happen in that moment? That if they happen, this is definitely a crisis. Is there any potential risk to human health and safety? And what actions we've taken so far? Once we have a grasp of the current situation, I summarize what we know so far along with what could be the potential consequences of what we are seeing. This is key. So all of us from different teams have the same understanding and perception of the situation. Perception matters, even more so in a crisis because that would trigger how people behave and what steps they take. After that, I share what we're doing together and delegate some of the specific tasks to key people in different teams, if it is a SOC team or a network team or whatever, for deeper analysis and containing the situation while I talk to business and other leaders, giving them a brief, especially to the executive management teams and the board. If we have already declared a crisis, this will be happening as a part of the crisis management team. Otherwise, I'll inform them depending on who are the key people that need to be knowing about with the situation that we are in currently. In a crisis, there will be some chaos, but it doesn't need to turn to panic. That's your job in managing the crisis well. At the same time, your ability to manage a crisis well will often lie in your ability to mobilize the right people in record time. And that's why it's very important, as I said earlier, that you might not actually have a crisis yet, and it's almost at the verge of it, and you're waiting for some of the triggers. So you need to be starting informing people that will be involved in case it becomes a crisis, so you're able to mobilize them in record time. There is a matter of seconds sometimes when an incident turns into a crisis, and you need to be ready for it. Number 5, your role in business as usual versus your role in a crisis. A lot of people forget that while you may be a network administrator, head of IT, or business leader in your everyday role, in your day-to-day business as usual, in a crisis, you'll be suddenly wearing multiple hats, being more hands-on, helping the crisis team with taking actions that have been discussed with and agreed with them. So many times I encounter in a crisis that you or your team go to someone and discuss with them what they need to be doing right now to help crisis teams to respond and to be able to contain. And their response is, well, that's not my role. It is. And most of these dual or triple roles need to be defined in your crisis management plan in advance. But at the same time, you need to have your key stakeholders with enough crisis management training to have a practical understanding of what is expected of them in such a crisis situation. In a crisis situation, you're no longer a head of architecture that's planning or building a city. You are a firefighter that's there to save the city and one that's ready to get their hands dirty. An ongoing crisis is not the time to be convincing someone of their tasks. It needs to happen in advance, beforehand, and it needs to be trained regularly so they're ready to support you and the crisis teams in hands-on, decisive, and action-driven manner. In addition to an overall crisis management plan, you need to establish operational cyber crisis management procedures for the various teams that will be involved in managing the crisis and train them on these. Grab my free crisis management template in the link below. Number 6, contain versus shoot yourself in the foot. While in a containment scenario, you'll be isolating the infected part of the infrastructure. But so many times I have seen clients pulling the plug of potentially impacted systems without understanding the dependency it has on other critical and functioning systems. Pulling the plug might stop the bleed, but if it breaks the supply chain or your core business, you've just traded one crisis for another. Containment is almost always the first key step in any ongoing crisis, but if done with haste without understanding what that means, you're just shooting yourself in the foot. Remember the scenario I was telling you about earlier, where the information was coming in, but the client was so much in a rush that they decided to turn some systems off without realizing the dependencies and actually putting critical systems down and offline because of that one decision that costed them and costed the business even more millions of dollars. While you want to contain, you want to identify and preserve what can be preserved so that the company can continue to run at least its core and critical business functions, something that's known as a minimum viable company. A minimum viable company, or MVC, is the smallest, most essential version of a company that can sustain its core operations and maintain its core value proposition even in the face of disruptions or adverse conditions such as an ongoing cyber attack. So you want to balance that containment versus shooting yourself in the foot. You don't want to do that. Number 7, effective and clear lines of communication, both written and verbal. How do you communicate successfully and effectively when under pressure? The key to that is already establishing clear, robust, and direct lines of communication. In my CISO roles, all communication on anything related to security and privacy, so cyber incidents, cyber crisis, or data breaches, regulatory violations, etc., all these required my involvement and approval. Most of these communications were my responsibility, and it was defined very clearly in my mandate, in our crisis management plan, and in overall company governance document. During a crisis, I'm doing way much more communication, both internally and externally, both in written and verbally. It usually entails me talking with the tech teams, the SOC teams, etc., 2 to 3 times a day, at least one briefing with the executive teams per day, sometimes even more if needed, and a much more frequent and regular board reporting and board briefing during an ongoing crisis. Even when it's my responsibility, I am coordinating with the head of comms for all internal communication, even when they go out from me. I'm coordinating with PR agency for all external communications, no matter who they go out from. Here's a key thing that I've learned. As a leader, especially if you're responsible for communication during a cyber attack or a cyber crisis, make sure you include key people like head of comms. You're transparent and that you document everything. Whether it's verbal or written, each and every of my communication template usually covers these 7 things. 1, when and what happened. So facts, stick to the facts. 2, how did we or how are we responding to that? What are we doing to contain the situation? So immediate to short-term actions like deactivating accounts, isolating machines, etc. Number 3, who or what has been impacted? Is it specific teams? Is it a specific service? Is it the client? What part of the client service? 4, what can you do as a customer? Is there anything you can do as well to reduce any further damage to your business in addition to what we are doing? 5, what are we doing to safeguard you, your data, or compensate for any losses or damages? 6, showcase honest communication, factual and as transparent as you can be. And 7, most important, rebuild trust. Be humble, transparent, and take accountability. Grab my free crisis communication template in the link below. Inform those that are not directly involved in the crisis management teams. Example, your employees. Information should come to them from within the company, from you, rather than from external media. The first time they will be hearing about this shouldn't be from outside in. It should be from you. No matter what you do not do these 3 things, especially in a crisis. Do not neglect the health and safety of your employees. That's always number 1. Do not create panic around you, especially not by injecting your leadership style. And number 3, do not hide information. Be factual, clear, and transparent. For more insights on AI, cyber, and leadership, subscribe to Monica Talks Cyber. This is Monica signing off.